Hello, I'm your host Jim McLean. Welcome back to another episode of the BanterFlix movie review show here on NvTv. Tonight I'm joined in the studio by Joe McElroy.
Good evening, Jim.
And Hamish Calvert.
Hi, Jim.
Hello to you both, guys. Let's see what movies we'll be talking about tonight. We'll be chatting about Aquaman, The Lost Kingdom after the first trailer dropped last week. We'll review Ballywalter ahead of its release this week. I'll be chatting with director Fran Rubel Kuzui about her film Toyoyo Pop. And we'll wrap up by sharing our thoughts on A Haunting in Venice, which is out in cinemas now. So that's what we'll be talking about on tonight's show. And as I said in the opening credits, Joe, we're going to be talking about Aquaman, The Lost Kingdom. Trailer broke just after we finished recording last week. I know we can't review the film, it's not going to be out till December. We've had The Flash out in cinemas recently, which didn't necessarily find a box office. I know if you listened to our podcast where myself and Adam and I were talking about that film, we weren't very positive, weren't very excited about Aquaman's release. But what about you?
I'm sort of cautiously optimistic about it. I think I was sort of in the minority in that I liked the first one. I liked the sort of tone that James Wan was going for, sort of over the top and a bit campy fun. And he seems to be sort of continuing that on with this here one. My only reservations are from the sort of behind the scenes stuff that I've heard. That has gone through, multiple reshoots, constantly putting stuff in, taking it out, and all the other sort of troubles in and around that there. But from what I've seen, I'm sort of cautiously optimistic towards it.
Okay. Well, I mean, Hamish, I know you're busting to talk about yet another superhero movie, but before you get a chance to share your thoughts, let's have a look at the trailer.
500 million people from every known species in the sea call this place home. But that doesn't mean they all like me.
I'm gonna kill Aquaman and destroy everything he holds dear. I'm gonna murder his family and burn his kingdom to ash.
So that's a look at the trailer for Aquaman, The Lost Kingdom. As Joe kind of alluded to, Hamish, we've got more of that campy tone. We're promised anyway, we're going to have even more of drumming octopus that we've seen in the first film. We may not see a return for Julie Andrews this time round. I want to sit here and be, I'm the person that's really bored and I'm suffering from comic book fatigue, but I like Patrick Wilson, I like Jason Momoa. We'll not talk too much about Amber Heard. We'll not talk too much about that, but I think this could be, as Joe said, campy fun. Where are you going to win? Are you going to make this 3 for 3, or are you going to go out there and say you're done?
Well, anything that even has a glimpse of Nicole Kidman has me sold. So it has that going for it. But it looks bold. It looks colourful. There's certainly a lot going on. It looks like there's everything but the kitchen sink in this going from the trailer. I think it's just the general state. It's the superhero fatigue. It's the imminent DC reset. It just sort of feels a bit aimless. I do enjoy James Wan as a director. I think he's got fun and style to his movies that make them worth seeing on the big screen, unlike some other superhero films. So yeah, it's cautious optimism. I don't think it's going to be spectacular. The first one did amazing box office, so it might replicate that, but I think it's just the timing of it, I think, is what the biggest issue is. But as I say, Nicole Kidman's in it, so I will be buying a ticket and be there opening weekend.
There we go. Just the proof is on the pudding. We are 3 men that are easily led. You've Nicole Kidman, I have drumming octopuses, and Joe, you just like the campy visuals. But look, that's a film that's not out until December, so we can't review it just yet. We will when it hits the cinema, but I think now we'll move on and discuss a film that's hitting cinemas this weekend.
Do you like taxiing?
Just a wee stopgap.
You want to be a comedian?
Not really. Just like a wee course.
Boing, boing.
Take me somewhere else.
That's the spirit. Where?
Don't know, somewhere.
Let's get out of the city.
They haven't had such a good night in so long. Thanks.
When comedy is at its best, it's a kind of healing.
Rise up, Eileen! All this talk about you want to go away? Well, you're fooling no one.
You're not the same. I don't know who you are anymore.
Neither do I.
Let's get out of the city.
Did you bring me here to offer spiritual guidance?
Sometimes it's not all about you, Eileen.
I didn't
Just no.
I'm not going to get down to that gig before I knock into next Sunday.
I wouldn't be here without you. Do you really think I can do it?
No, but that's not the point, is it?
So that's a look at Ballywalter. It's hitting cinemas this weekend. We have Paddy Keelty in this. We have Shauna Krislack in this as well. Paddy Keelty, he's on RTE screens. Now he's on the big screen this weekend. Joe, do you want to lead the way? The trailer kind of sets up as much of the film as people really need to know going in. We have two very different people that are suffering in own ways, grief, trauma, past, coming together in an unorthodox way. What do you think?
I quite liked it. When I seen the sort of trailer and the publicity about it, I was sort of a bit apprehensive about it, like, not another sort of low-key dramedy. I'm just sort of like fed up with those kind of films. But when I went to actually see it a few weeks ago in the QFT when there was a Q&A involved with it, and from the opening shots just of the taxi drive or in and around Belfast, I was sort of sold. I was like, oh, this is the sort of Belfast I know. This is what I understand and recognise. So as soon as I seen that, I was just sort of locked in. And then from there, we're led into Shauna Krislack's life, and then eventually her relationship with Paddy Keelty's character. But that's the thing, it was just the way it just gradually brought you into the story that I really appreciated that there. And the way it sort of captures our sense of humour and unique style in and around that, I really appreciated. And just the general themes around it and how these two different people are going through some sort of mental issues, but they're doing it in very different manners. Like Patrick Keelty's character is sort of in a midlife crisis and he decides to take up a comedy class, and Shauna Krislack's character just doesn't know what to do with her life. It's quite aimless. So it's the manner in which these two characters from different areas interact with each other that sort of drew me in more than anything, and that's really just down to the script, which is really good.
Yeah, Stacey Gregg is the screenwriter here. I mean, I'm a massive fan of her work. I mean, she wrote and directed Here Before, which I absolutely love, with Andrea Risper. I had a chance to talk to her about that at an event in Bangor last year, and just got a chance to wax lyrical about how much I loved her writing in this. And kind of just following on what you said, it's the fact that both characters seem fully, they're rounded out. There's more to them. There's cracks within them. They're not just monolithic characters, which we do sometimes see. And I thought, truth be told, I mean, Paddy Keelty, if I'm right, I think this is his acting debut. I mean, we've seen him on our screens for years. I remember the days of PK Tonight and seeing him on The Empire, which is of course ironic because he's in The Empire near the end of this film, and he's a natural comedian. And the fact that he's quite good in that, making it sense of being someone who's clearly not. Like, there's a bit of King of Comedy in that sense of how unnatural he looks on the stage doing comedy. But I will say, front and centre, I'm a massive fan of her anyway as an actor. I mean, I've loved her from A Date for Mad Mary. Shauna Krislack is just amazing. I'll not allow myself to wax lyrical too much, but she's fantastic. And it's her performance that I think really sold the film. Paddy Keelty is doing his thing, and I applaud that, but it's the performance of Shauna who's just outstanding. This that I think, for me, is why after a couple of days of watching it, I'm still thinking about it. But what about you, Hamish?
Yeah, I would totally agree with both of you. I think the first thing that struck me was the really good sense of place that it has. And whilst it's called Ballywalter, it is mainly set in and around Belfast city centre. And I think local viewers will really enjoy that. There's so many venues used and streets that you all recognise. So I think that's really good. But then that feeds right into Stacey Gregg's screenplay and the dialogue and the colloquialisms that are given to the characters. And like you say, they are well-rounded, and I think you could say the sort of premise of it is maybe slightly cliched, but it's how that Stacey writes in the sense of place to the characters and how that shapes their attitudes and their feelings towards things and towards sharing their feelings. So I think it's just really well thought out. And like you say, the performances are good. Paddy Keelty does well in his debut, and I think the local setting really helps him in that. I think he feels at home and he feels in the right place for that. But like you say, Shauna Krislack is definitely, no pun intended, the driving force behind this film, and I think the pair of them together make for a really good debut for of Paddy Kilday's and the director. But I think it is Stacey Gregg's screenplay that really lifts it up, and there's also a cheeky cameo from her, which I think is worth the price of admission alone.
That is very, very true. And you've mentioned it, and I have it written down here in front of me. Apologies if I'm going to get it wrong. Prashana Purwani Raja is the director. So look, that is largely 3 for 3 then for Ballywalter. So that's out in cinemas this weekend. We're going to move on, and over the summer, whilst the show was off air, I got to go to the Edinburgh International Film Festival. While I was there, I got a chance to speak to a couple of directors that were there. One of them was Fran Rubel Kuzui, the director of Toyoyo Pop, film back from 1993 that has recently been re-released and is on the festival circuit. And here's that interview.
Dear Jim, got your postcard. Hope you meant it when you said wish you were here, because I'm coming to Japan. I was supposed to visit my girlfriend here, and she went and she moved to Thailand.
You're gonna have a great time here. They love blonde.
Toyoyo Pop is a lost film. The distributor and the video distributor both went out of business soon after I made the movie, actually, during the process of releasing it. And we were independent filmmakers making our first film. We didn't really pay attention to what was going on. Hey, we got the film made. That's all we really cared.
It's a miracle to get films made.
Exactly. We were just coasting on the miracle, just, surfing the goodness and not really thinking about anything bad happening to the film. All the good had happened to it. And we didn't pay attention to what was happening to the different elements, because it's very different from filmmaking today, where everything is digital and lives in the cloud. Our internegative, which is how you make the picture, was in a laboratory, and our audio was in a different laboratory. And over the years, both of those laboratories went out of business, and the sound element wound up in a major Hollywood studio archive in London, and the picture element had to be rescued from the warehouse by the Motion Picture Academy of Arts and Sciences. I mean, one guy went in his own car and they loaded up his trunk, and he literally ferried the stuff from there from the Producers Film Center to the Academy Archive and saved it for us. Otherwise, we never would have been able to restore the film. So it's a kind of Cinderella story of an independent film re-emerging 35 years later and suddenly finding a relevancy, because it's about Tokyo in the 80s, which at the time when I made the film, very few people ever thought they'd even go to Japan, much less be interested in it. And so the scenes of people eating ramen and going to love hotels and dancing on the streets of Harajuku were very foreign to people. Now we're showing it to audiences who just nod their heads and laugh.
Yeah, that's completely normal.
Yeah, and so for both Kaz, the producer, and I, it's been so much fun going to screenings all over and meeting young people who go, I love this movie, because it speaks to them, and it speaks to the relationship between Wendy and Hiro, which is very lovely and sweet, and there's no barriers, and there's no pose or nothing. It's just about meeting somebody who's very different from you and exactly like you at the same time.
I've only been in Japan a little over 2 weeks, 16 days, really. I'm a singer, rock and roll, like you, right?
Sure. Can you take a drink with me tomorrow?
Okay.
Okay?
Sure.
Cheers.
And when I made the film, I was really trying to make it from the two different perspectives. It was my first film. I studied film at New York University, but I was female in the 80s or in the 60s when I studied film, and women just didn't make films. And so I graduated from film school never even expecting to make a film, and didn't even have a glimpse of an opportunity to make a film as a director until I was 40. It just wasn't even anything anyone was willing to listen to if I talked about it. So I decided I wanted to make the film I would have made when I was 22 and graduated from film school. So that was foremost in my mind, and I was not referring to anything, and I was not thinking about anything. I was trying to be 22 and making that first film that you have when you have all this passion for filmmaking. And after I made the film, I'm clearly American, and a lot of agents, Hollywood agents, wanted to meet me. And I would go to meetings and I would walk in and they would kind of like look around because they were waiting for the Japanese-American 22-year-old girl to walk through the door, and in came, you know, me from New York. And they were just flabbergasted because I guess I hid myself very well as a 22-year-old Asian American woman. I don't know.
I'm so confused.
I don't want you to go.
I'll always be the gaijin, the freak.
Can you sing with me? Come on.
Carrie is a special human being, and I say is because she's still very much alive for so many people. She was my great collaborator on making the film. I can't imagine having made this film that turned out this way without her. But I can say the same for Diamond Yukai, who was Yutaka when he made the film, but has become known as Diamond Yukai. They were both enormous collaborators. But Carrie in particular was the other foreigner. The cameraman was from New York, because I needed somebody I could communicate with, but the rest of the crew was all Japanese. And so a lot of it was just me and Carrie arriving on locations and going, what the, huh? Because we shot on location. Those are not, when you see the film, you'll see those are not extras in the background. That's just whatever was there reused. The people lying on the ground in the train station and the kids dancing in the street, whatever it was, it was. And so a lot of it was me and Carrie just looking at a scene and looking at where we were going to shoot the scene and just going for it.
So that's my interview with Fran Kuzui, and Hamish, as she said in the interview, this is a lost film. Didn't find a huge audience at the box office, but got lost through various reasons with companies going out of business. It's now been remastered, re-released, and as I say, it's on the festival circuit. It has recently been screened in Derry, Londonderry at the Nerve Centre. I'm not sure if it's going to be screened here at the QFT, but we've all seen this, and I'll start with you. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I hadn't seen the film before the show tonight. Watched it for this specifically, and I hadn't even heard of it before. And after watching it, I sort of feel like I know why. As you say, it's been through a lot, and it became lost film. But I just didn't think much of it, if I'm honest. I thought it's very underwritten. The premise is fine, but I think it's just very generic. I feel like the edit doesn't help it. Things just sort of happen and they feel quite unearned, I think, most of the time. Even the central romance, I didn't buy the chemistry and I just wasn't convinced by a lot of it. It wasn't until about an hour in when the two main characters, they sing "You Make Me Feel Like a Natural Woman." So that was the first thing that really engaged me and sort of compelled me. And there are a few moments like that later on, then closer to the finale, which I did appreciate, but overall, it just didn't come together for me in the way I was sort of hoping it to. For a film about rock and roll, I felt it played it very safe. And when there's the likes of things, not exactly the same, but more recently, like you've had Skull of Rock and you've had Sing Street and those films about bands and bands coming together and trying to find success, those sort of things. I think it lacked the charm of those. So it didn't really do much for me, but I'm glad it's being re-released and maybe will find a bigger audience than it did upon its release.
I agree with you in the sense that the rock and roll element is, to an extent, I mean, there's parts of it I think work, but what I like about it is that sense of a fish out of water. I always have a soft spot for those type of films and that kind of East meets West culture clash. And there's some moments I think visually work really well. I think it undoubtedly has its heart in its right place. It's a sweet-natured film, elements of A Star Is Born and how it resolves itself, but I don't necessarily love it. I mean, this is a director that came from the first Buffy feature, brought us Buffy to the big screen. Look where that's come. So I think it's fine. I still think it will find an audience, because I think kind of Asian culture, if I can be so bold as to kind of call it that, is quite in vogue right now. So I think there's that element that works in the film's favour now. But that's my thoughts. Joe, this is the first film we've maybe seemingly been disagreeing about. You know, we're not going to resort to fisticuffs. That is not the BanterFlix way until after the camera has finished rolling. Hamish wasn't sold. I have a soft spot for the film. What about you?
Yeah, there's a line down that table right now. Yeah, I'm sort of with Hamish in this one. I think it's just a bit generic, to be honest with you. Leo, it's just a film that sort of goes through the motions for like the first hour, just like Hamish was alluding to, and by the time it does kick in, you're like, oh, okay, well, why couldn't it have happened a bit sooner? You know, I did, like Hamish, I didn't really buy the chemistry between the leads. I thought it was sort of just plodded along, but I will give it its due in that I do sort of like the way it's like a time capsule for films that were made then. So in that respect, it'd be nice it'd be nice for new audiences to look, okay, well, these are what like standard films in the early 90s were like, something like this here. But yeah, you're talking about the cultural exchange and the fish out of water element, but I kind of like the inverse of that as well, in that the Japanese singer, they were singing songs from like the 60s and 70s and so on, and they're just putting a 90s twist on it. So I like that sort of element, but it doesn't really explore it enough. It's just sort of all very surface level. So I'm not too hot on this one, to be honest.
That's okay. You can always disagree. That's the BanterFlix way. It's a nice little community. And as I say, it's not that I love the film unashamedly. I just will back a film that has its heart in its right place. But right, we have had an international themed show. We went from the Lost Kingdom to the kingdom that is Ballywalter. We've went to Tokyo. I think we'll wrap this show up with a trip to Venice.
Please understand, madame, I would welcome with open arms any honest sign of devil or demon or ghost. For if there is a ghost, there is a soul. If there is a soul, there is a God who made it. And if we have God, we have everything, meaning, order, justice. But I have seen too much of the world. Countless crimes, 2 wars, the bitter evil of human indifference. And I conclude, no God, no ghosts. With respect, no mediums who can speak to them.
You were saying?
So that's a look at Haunting in Venice. It's out in cinemas now. This is the 3rd outing for Kenneth Branagh behind the scenes and in front of the camera as Hercule Poirot. We've had Murder in the Orient Express, Death in the Nile. Now we have a Haunting in Venice. Out in cinemas. Hamish, what do you think?
Well, like as the title suggests, it is darker in tone than its previous two, so there's quite a shift. And sort of coming up on Halloween, I can see the release strategy there, and the trailer looked like it was sort of like a murder mystery horror almost. But I think audiences should be wary of that sort of marketing, because whilst it has a really good atmosphere in terms of setting up, the cinematography looks really good, a big step up from the previous films, and the score's good. The sort of context with the ghost stories around the house that it's set in is all really good, but then it doesn't really do much with that eerie atmosphere. It just sort of starts to rely on these lazy jump scares that you can see coming a mile off. So whilst I'll give it props for doing something different with the tone, initially it sets that tone well, but it then sort of doesn't do much with it, which was a bit of a disappointment. But the cast are good too. You've also got Jamie Dornan and Jude Hill, who play father and son again, like Belfast, and you've got Michelle Yeoh and a few other names, but I don't think any of them really stand out as much for better or worse in terms of previous cast members of his previous films. So I think for the first time in 3 films, it's actually Kenneth Branagh's performance that stands out most. It's sort of the closest it gets to camp and fun, and I think that's what the film sort of needed to do more. It needed to lean into that, because whilst it tries to be a bit more serious and a bit darker, because it doesn't really go fully into that, I think it comes across a bit bland in places. So I think if they'd leaned in a bit more to the camp, it could have been more memorable. But it's still very good and enjoyable murder mystery. It's very solid, 3 stars for me, I would say.
I would tend to agree with you on this. I think there's definitely a sense that now for the third outing, I think Branagh has definitely, he's comfortable behind the moustache now for Poirot. We get that. I was talking earlier on about films I have soft spots for. I have soft spots for murder mysteries. I just think now in recent years, I think the level has been raised on that front. I mean, we kind of went away for a while, but now we've had Knives Out, we've had Glass Onion, even, dare I say, the first 2 Poirot films that Branagh did, that has raised the bar here. It's fine. I enjoyed myself at the cinema. Would I be rushing to go back and see it? No. Like you mentioned, Hamish, I think some of the cast members, considering the talent there, they're a bit underused. Michelle Yeoh, very much so. I mean, probably the time this was recorded, she was not an Oscar-winning actress. But here we have an Oscar-winning actress being given very little to do. Tina Fey, for me, was the other big, not misfire, but just underwhelming. I think it's held together primarily by Branagh's performance, but I also want to throw out back our own. I think Jamie Dornan and Jude Hill, I think they're both, in the limited screen time they have, I think they hold their own. So again, it's a bit of a cinematic 3-star meh from me. What about you?
Well, for me, it's a 3.5 star, just to sort of elevate a bit. No, I really enjoyed it. And just the sort of dark and moody sort of tone, I was just locked in. And I know Hamish said he's seen the jump scares come a mile away. It scared me because I was just so locked into everything that was happening. And I sort of agree with him in terms of how Branagh's performance stands out more than anything else. And I think it's because he's decided to be less playful with the character, and it sort of is a reflection of where the character is. He's in exile now. He's sort of done with being a detective, and he is more somber and contemplative. And the supporting cast, I did like the way he didn't really go for like huge names like he has in the past. I do appreciate like even having the likes of Michelle Yeoh in that, and it's, you think, oh, she's going to be the big lead, and maybe not so much, tried. But yeah, I really enjoyed it for what it was.
I know we're going to wrap up. I'm going to come back to you, Hamish, and I will come back to you, Joe, as well. I mean, yes, we have a bit of a delusioned kind of Poirot that is more aggressive, I think, than we've seen before. Is retired, is considering retirement. Do you think, would you want to see another outing for our favourite Belgium moustached detective?
No, I would be more than happy to see Branagh make another 10 of these. Like, I haven't read any myself, but I'm pretty sure there's quite a few more Agatha Christie novels left. So yeah, I'd like to see him continue and see if he could get up to Ryan Johnson's level.
There we go. There's a few definitely to out there with the novels. What about you, Joe? Would you want to see more outings for Poirot?
Oh, absolutely. Like, and I was the biggest skeptic going into this one. Definitely would like to see, where he goes from here. You were talking about the different locations. I think Branagh should go back to Belfast even with it. I know it's maybe not one of Agatha Christie's novels, but hey, he took liberties with this one, so he might as well take a few more liberties.
Kenneth, if you're watching, Sir Kenneth, if you're watching, make it happen. But look, that's all we have time for this week on the show. Just before we go, let's have a look at what films we'll be discussing next week.
Holy. I will tell you, I've never seen anything like it. Holy.
Is the craziest I think I've ever seen.
Everything okay?
$11 million? What are you gonna do? Get a Ferrari? What the?
Oh, language. The baby's here.
So you've never left Firetown?
Sorry, buddy. Elements don't mix.
Hey!
Plus, my dad would boil you alive.
Why does anyone get to tell you what you can do in your life? Come on! Why do they even have these?
Who knows?
So that's films we'll be discussing on next week's show, and all that's left for me to do now this evening is thank my two guests here in the studio. So thank you very much, Joe.
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks very much, Hamish.
Cheers, Jim.
Thanks very much for watching at home. We'll be back next week with another episode. But for now, until then, goodbye.